The ghosting generation. You don't need to have been ghosted to feel its impact on your life, because ghosting isn't just when someone disappears without explanation, it's a symptom of something much bigger. An entire generation that has lost the courage to look people in the eye, to tell the truth, and to deal with discomfort. And if you think this has nothing to do with you, think again. Ghosting has created a culture of disposable relationships, of conversations that never reach an ending, of people who disappear and people who are left wondering what they did wrong, even when they did nothing wrong. How many times have you waited for a reply that never came? How many times has someone simply left you talking to yourself? How many times did you feel that something was missing, but couldn't quite explain what it was? That is also ghosting, and it affects more than just the heart. It affects self-esteem, trust, the way we relate to others, and even our ability to believe that we deserve something better. This video isn't just about the people who disappeared. It's about you, about understanding why this behavior has become so common, about recognizing how it shapes our connections, even when we don't realize it, and most importantly, about how you can protect yourself emotionally in a world where people vanish before they ever truly arrive. If you've been through this, you'll finally find answers. If you haven't, you'll learn how to avoid it. And if you think this has nothing to do with you, stay until the end. You might be surprised. Have you ever stopped to think about why ghosting doesn't hurt only because of the silence, but because of the story it leaves unfinished? It's not the ending that hurts, it's the not knowing. It's the doubt. It's the emptiness that opens up between everything's fine and total disappearance. And what's even more disturbing isn't realizing that someone vanished. It's realizing how normal this has become. An honest question: when did disappearing become easier than being honest? When did the simple act of saying, "I don't want to continue," become too heavy for an entire generation? Because behind ghosting, there's something much bigger happening, something no one likes to admit, but everyone feels: the growing fear of dealing with vulnerability, the fear of disappointing someone, the fear of taking emotional responsibility, the fear of being human enough to have a real conversation. And this is where our video truly begins. Not with the stories of those who disappeared, but with the stories of those who were left behind. Because when someone disappears, it's not just a person who's gone, the answers disappear, the meaning disappears, the continuity disappears, and the human brain hates gaps. It needs to fill them. It needs to find logic. And that's exactly where ghosting becomes devastating. You see this when you watch someone reread every message they sent, every gesture, every look, trying to figure out where everything went wrong. But what if I told you that most of the time, nothing went wrong because of something you did? That ghosting reveals far more about the person who leaves than about the person who stays. Why does someone simply disappear? Why has this behavior spread so widely? And why is it that even people who have never experienced ghosting are still being affected by this culture of disappearance? The question that guides this video is simple yet profound. Is ghosting an individual problem, or is it a symptom of an emotionally exhausted generation? In the next few minutes, we're going to explore this question deeply. We'll look at the psychology behind disappearing, at the fragility hidden behind silence, and at the invisible marks left on those who were ghosted, and even on those who never were, but live in fear of becoming one. Because ghosting isn't limited to someone simply vanishing. It creates a system of fragile, disposable, emotionally shallow relationships. And maybe, just maybe, understanding this phenomenon is the first step toward getting out of it, or better yet, toward never entering it in the first place. So stay with me, because what comes next may change the way you see not only ghosting, but the way our entire generation deals with affection, responsibility, and presence. How did we get here? The origins of the ghosting generation. Before we understand why people disappear, we need to understand the world that taught people how to disappear. Ghosting didn't come out of nowhere. It's the result of a perfect combination, a collision between technology, endless options, emotional fear, in a culture that turned human relationships into fast, disposable, replaceable connections. Think about it with me. A few years ago, if you wanted to end something with someone, you had to talk, you had to explain, you had to face it, and above all, you had to take responsibility for what you felt. Today, you don't. With a single tap on a screen, an entire conversation disappears. A person turns into a gray icon. A bond turns into silence. And without even realizing it, we created a society where disappearing became easier than telling the truth. But why? Because technology introduced a paradox. The more options we have, the less depth we're able to sustain, and the less depth we sustain, the more disposable relationships become. We're living in the age of whatever. If something bothers you, swipe away. If someone says something you don't like, there are 10 others waiting in line. If a relationship requires emotional maturity, the solution is one button away: block. And it's exactly in this environment that ghosting finds fertile ground. But there's something even deeper happening to us, something that goes beyond technology. We've become a generation afraid of vulnerability, afraid of hurting others, afraid of being the villain, afraid of admitting we don't want something anymore, afraid of difficult conversations, afraid of facing our own emotions. And when fear grows, escape becomes a strategy. That's how ghosting emerges as an emotionally cheap solution. If I disappear, I don't have to face it. If I vanish, no one can confront me. If I don't respond, technically, I didn't do anything. But the truth is, you did. And a lot. Because when someone chooses to disappear, they're not just avoiding a conversation, they're avoiding being seen. And avoiding being seen is also a reflection of pain. Ghosting isn't just about a lack of respect. It's about a lack of emotional skills. It's about a lack of relational maturity. It's about an entire society that has forgotten how to tolerate discomfort. And the result is clear: more fragile relationships, more insecure people, more superficial bonds, and an entire generation trying to understand why it's so hard to maintain something real. But there's a question that needs to be asked now, because it changes the entire perspective. If ghosting says so much about the person who disappears, what does it reveal about the person who stays? This is where our journey continues, because ghosting doesn't affect only the behavior of those who vanish, it deeply shapes how the ones left behind begin to see themselves. And understanding this is essential to breaking the cycle. When someone disappears without explanation, it's not just a person who's gone. Logic disappears, meaning disappears. The story that was supposed to continue is abruptly, violently, silently interrupted. And when a story ends this way, the brain goes into emotional collapse. Because contrary to what many people believe, ghosting doesn't hurt because of abandonment. It hurts because of the void. And it's inside that void that self-esteem begins to erode. The mind asks questions it can't answer. What did I do? Why did this happen? Was I not enough? What did I say wrong? And without answers, the brain creates its own. And almost always, it creates the worst ones. Ghosting is an invisible form of violence because it leaves the victim talking to themselves. And when the conversation is internal, it tends to be cruel. That's when distorted thoughts appear. I'm not desirable. I don't deserve someone who stays. I ruined everything. I'm not good enough. The other person's disappearance becomes a distorted mirror. And in that reflection, the person sees a version of themselves that doesn't match reality. But what no one talks about is that this reflection has nothing to do with the person who was ghosted. It has everything to do with the person who did the ghosting. Because when someone disappears, it's not the victim who lacks value, it's the other person who doesn't know how to face their own truth.
But the feeling is different. The feeling is rejection, devaluation, being forgotten as if you never meant anything at all. And that creates a wound that's hard to explain, because ghosting is a kind of pain with no body, no dialogue, no closure. It's a pain that exists only because something that should have existed didn't. And when something essential is missing, the brain tries to fill the gap. It revisits every message, every meeting, every detail, as if it were searching for clues to a crime that never happened. But the truth is simple and hard to accept. The reason someone disappears rarely has anything to do with you. Most of the time, Ghosting reveals the other person's emotional incapacity, not your value. Still, for the one who was left behind, that doesn't change the immediate impact. Ghosting disrupts identity. It distorts self-worth. It damages the ability to trust. It makes a person doubt themselves even when nothing they did would justify the disappearance. And that creates a silent trauma, the feeling that at any moment someone could disappear again, even when everything seems to be going well. It's a fear that settles in, a constant alert, an insecurity that follows the next conversation, the next date, the next attempt. And the question that lingers deep down is always the same. What if it happens again? That's why understanding ghosting is so important, because it doesn't just shape the past and shapes the emotional future of those who lived through it. And only when we recognize this wound can we stop it from continuing to bleed. To truly understand ghosting, it's not enough to look at just two people, the one who disappears and the one who stays. We need to look at the culture that formed this dynamic, because ghosting isn't just an individual behavior, it's a collective symptom, a clear reflection of how our generation learned or failed to learn how to deal with emotions, connection, and emotional responsibility. We grew up in a world that promoted a dangerous idea, that discomfort is unbearable, that anything that causes friction must be avoided, that difficult conversations can, and even should, be replaced with silence. And when an entire society starts running from discomfort, it creates a culture of emotional avoidance.
Ghosting is just the visible tip of this culture. We live in the age of instant communication, but also in the age of immediate disconnection. People are more accessible than ever, but also more disposable, more exposed, and paradoxically, more isolated. And this has a profound impact. 1. A generation that can't sustain depth. Fast relationships, endless matches, the constant sense of unlimited options. All of this has trained our minds to move forward without going deeper. And when there's no depth, any friction feels too heavy. Any discomfort becomes a reason to disappear. Any unease turns into an excuse to run. That's how a generation is born. One that never learned how to say, I don't want this, but learned how to swipe and move on to the next. 2. The normalization of escape. Ghosting has become so common that almost no one questions it anymore. It's as if disappearing were an acceptable way to deal with emotions, and when something becomes acceptable, it becomes a habit. And when it becomes a habit, it becomes culture. Today, disappearing isn't the exception. It's the norm, and that says far more about the society we live in than about any individual story. 3. More fragile relationships and shorter bonds. If everything can be discarded at any moment, relationships begin to form under fear. Fear of attachment, fear of trust, fear of emotional exposure. And bonds built on fear have no foundation. They crack easily, they break quickly, they end without warning. Ghosting has created a generation that fears abandonment, but has also learned to abandon first in an unconscious attempt at self-protection. 4. Underdeveloped emotional skills. Talking, explaining, closing cycles, all of this requires emotional maturity. It requires presence. It requires responsibility. But if the current culture offers shortcuts to escape, why face discomfort? So with every disappearance, the emotional capacity of the generation shrinks a little more, and a society that fails to develop basic emotional skills becomes an emotionally illiterate society. 5. The epidemic of superficiality. When bonds lose depth, people lose courage. They move through life afraid to touch and to be touched, afraid of commitment and surrender, always ready to retreat at the first sign of vulnerability. And vulnerability, the foundation of any real relationship, becomes rare, almost an emotional relic. But there's one point no one likes to admit. The culture of ghosting wasn't created by a small group of individuals. It was created by all of us, by urgency, by anxiety, by fear, by convenience, by technology, by the lack of emotional education, by the belief that everything is replaceable except our own pain.
And the result is clear: an entire generation that knows how to communicate but doesn't know how to connect, that knows how to talk but doesn't know how to open up, that knows how to begin but doesn't know how to end. Because ending something requires courage, and courage is exactly what this generation is still learning how to develop. Emotional healing, rebuilding what ghosting tries to destroy. Being ghosted doesn't hurt because of the loss. It hurts because of the ambiguity, not knowing why, not knowing when things started to fall apart, not knowing whether you could have done something differently, not knowing whether the other person truly cared or was pretending the entire time. This lack of closure creates some of the deepest pains people report, the pain of invisibility. Many people describe ghosting as becoming no one, as if by disappearing, the other person erased your existence, as if everything you shared had been a mistake of perception. This sense of invisibility is devastating. It activates an ancient fear, the fear of not being seen, not being chosen, not being loved. Identity confusion. The person begins to doubt themselves. Did I imagine everything? Was I too intense? Am I not good enough? This doubt corrodes from the inside. It's as if ghosting fractures your sense of self-confidence. Exhaustive rumination. Anyone who has been ghosted knows this. The problem isn't the lack of answers. It's the brain trying to create answers on its own, and it creates the worst ones. Replaying conversations, reinterpreting looks, imagining words that were never spoken, building endless hypotheses. It's like being forced to assemble a puzzle with half of the pieces missing. Healing starts here by realizing that ghosting is not a judgment of your worth, but a reflection of the other person's emotional limitations. When you truly understand this, the ghost dissolves, and instead of asking, "What did I do wrong?" you begin to say, "I deserve someone who knows how to stay."
Recognizing the signs, intuition always knows first. Ghosting rarely happens out of nowhere. It leaves signs subtle but present, and these signs activate pains that people describe again and again. The sudden sense of disconnection, the energy shifts, the conversation cools down, the presence fades. You feel it, but you try to ignore it because you want to believe everything is fine. The anxiety between messages, replying too fast, replying too slowly, replying without depth. It's an emotional dance imposed by the other person without warning, and that creates a very specific kind of pain, the pain of induced insecurity, the gradual loss of interest, fewer questions, less curiosity, less enthusiasm, and the person being ghosted tries to compensate, sending more messages, trying harder to please, trying to keep alive something the other person has already decided to abandon, the fear of being needy. The victim feels that if they show discomfort, they'll be seen as too much, so they swallow their feelings, and swallowing feelings hurts. The intuition you try to silence, you know something is wrong, but you're afraid to confirm it. The body always knows. It's the mind that takes longer to accept it. That's why learning to recognize the signs is an act of self-care, not to avoid pain, but to avoid taking responsibility for someone else's emotionally immature behavior. Breaking the ghosting culture. First within yourself, then in the world. If ghosting has shaped an emotionally evasive generation, the way to break it isn't by trying to train other people, it's by changing yourself so you never repeat the pattern that hurt you. Staying is an act of courage. Saying you don't want something is courage. Ending things with honesty is courage. Telling the truth is courage, and courage inspires. Courage creates real bonds. Vulnerability is strength, not weakness. The ghosting generation is a generation afraid of feeling, afraid of exposure, afraid of being seen, afraid of rejection. When you allow yourself to feel and express that with emotional maturity, you break a cycle that's been repeating for decades. The other person does not define your value. When you understand that a ghoster disappears because of their limitations, not because of you, you free yourself from trying to interpret the silence, trying to beg for explanations, trying to earn presence, trying to shrink yourself to fit. You start choosing those who choose you. Real relationships require presence, and presence isn't about replying quickly, it's about replying truthfully. When you adopt this posture, you become exactly what the ghosting generation fears most, an emotionally mature person. And emotionally mature people don't disappear, they take a stand. Maybe you've been ghosted. Maybe you're still afraid of being ghosted. Or maybe you've ghosted someone and are only now realizing the weight of that choice. But no matter where you are in this story, one truth remains. Ghosting does not define who you are, but how you deal with it can define who you become. We live in a time when disappearing is easy, but staying is rare. Those who stay are strong. Those who stay are honest. Those who stay choose to feel instead of running away. And maybe, in the end, the greatest antidote to ghosting isn't trying to understand why someone disappeared, but learning to value those who choose to stay. Because in the middle of a generation that runs, the person who stays is always the bravest one. And that person can, and it should, be you. If you've ever experienced ghosting, please share your story with us. Your experience might help someone else. See you in the next video.